Call, text, email, then join me along with the experts from the law firm of Hollis, Wright. Join us Sunday after the news at 10.
Car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis Wright and host David Lamb.
Hello and welcome into the attorneys. Appreciate you spending your Sunday evening with us. For the next half hour, we're going to talk about issues that we think matter to you and get you some expert legal advice. And we encourage you to be a part of this conversation. You can call, text, email. And in fact, if you do so right now, there is a real lawyer who's standing by to field those, not only here, but one way or another, they're going to get you. Folks are standing by and would love to hear from you. So come on and join in the conversation. Josh Firth of the firm Hollis Wright is leading our discussion. Good to see you, Josh.
Good to see you, David. Thanks for having us.
So right now, someone is standing by to take to answer the call, text, or the email, right?
That's exactly right. If you call in and you can't get through to the show, we've got 2 lawyers from our firm every time this show is on, ready to man the phones. We take every call live that we can get. If for some reason we can't get it, it rolls to the answering center, and we immediately either return the call or we get back to them by the next morning.
Yeah, so kind of neat way for our viewers to be a part of the conversation.
That's right. Every text is answered live as well during the show, so send them in. We love to get those, and we're ready to field your call.
Our topic of conversation tonight is wrongful death, and got someone here that an expert in this line.
That's right, David. We're lucky to have John Morrison here with us. John's a good buddy of mine. We work together on a lot of cases and handles cases around the state, local lawyer with us, and I'm glad he came on and was willing to talk about this. It's an important topic, affects all of us, and it's a kind of an interesting area of the law that goes hand in hand with a lot of the other topics we talk about on here.
Thanks for having me on, Josh. David, I'd like to say hello to Devin, who's watching at home. This is a fascinating topic, and if the viewers have any questions, feel free to call in at 324-3600, and we'll answer all your questions as we go along.
Let's jump in, and often those kind of the first questions as we ease into the topic of conversation. Help us understand what is a wrongful death claim, even that term itself, wrongful death.
Right. Yeah, David, wrongful death it's kind of what's called a term of art, which is just a specialized legal term. Basically, what it really boils down to is if someone's death is caused by the negligence or some wrongful act of someone else. You know, we talk on the show about a lot of different things: product liability, boating accidents, car accidents, defective products, dram shop litigation. All of those that result in a death of someone because of the wrongful conduct of someone, illegal or negligent conduct of someone, those result in what can be a wrongful death claim. And that's just a specialized set of laws that allow you to bring a claim for damages, monetary damages for the loss of life of someone.
All right. And you agree? I mean, pretty much that's a good definition and a working definition.
Yeah, he hit the nail on the head. And you know, wrongful death claims may only be filed by an administrator or an executor of an estate. Once an estate is opened, and this person must formally be granted permission to file the claim by a judge. And here in Jefferson County, we also have a county administrator, Elizabeth McElroy, who is a wonderful lawyer and a great lady. And she can act on behalf of the estate to help facilitate the case if need be, if the family doesn't have an administrator who is ready or willing or able, or if the cause of action arises with a family who's out of state, or if they don't have property here. And an interesting thing to note now, there's been a new development in the law where the Supreme Court has recently ruled where an administrator is entitled to a portion of the fee when the wrongful death case settles. So that is an important thing for the lawyers to consider and remember. And of course, Josh's firm has a lot of expertise in this area, and if someone does have a wrongful death fact pattern or a family member who's been killed in what they consider to be a wrongful death accident, like an automobile accident, an 18-wheeler accident.
Yeah, give us some examples of
on-the-job accident.
I mean, maybe even cases that you all have heard or filed, some examples to help us understand some real-life examples of wrongful death claims.
Yeah, and John was just hitting on some of those. I mean, he mentioned automobile accidents, 18-wheelers, train accidents, motorcycle wrecks. I mean, I can think of one that Josh Wright, who's on the show a lot, my partner, he and I handled a case in the dram shop litigation, for example. That's alcohol-related stuff, a couple years ago, where a lady was intoxicated, bar overserved her, she left, and she killed 2 passengers in her car. Well, they had wrongful death claims, but brought under the dram shop statute. Or, for example, I've got a case right now where a young man was driving down the road. A gentleman on the other side of a 2-lane highway was texting, crossed the center line and hit him head on, and the young man was killed. That's a wrongful death claim. If the young man hadn't been killed, that would be a general negligence claim.
Right.
I had a car accident, it was somebody else's fault, but because he died, the law protects him in a different way. One interesting thing that John mentioned I do want to kind of point out is that a big difference in your general personal injury case that we talk about all the time on the show and wrongful death is what he mentioned is we have to have an estate opened. And that means the claim's brought by somebody other than the deceased individual. For example, if I were to die in a car accident that was someone else's fault, my wife would probably be the administrator of the estate. And that's a complicated process. You need a lawyer for that. You got to go through probate court. You got to get an estate set up. You got to have letters of administration granted, which allow the person to act on behalf of the deceased individual and to bring a claim for them. So that's one of those cases where call in. If you've got a claim you think is important, call in, let our lawyers help you walk through that process, or we'll get you in touch with John. He can help you walk through it because it can be very complicated.
And another area to remember are nursing home cases. If someone dies in a nursing home and you or your family feel as if the person shouldn't have died or they suffered neglect or abuse, then you may want to call a lawyer. Or a defective product. If they were injured by a defective product, then you may have a wrongful death claim. And anytime you think that something bad has happened or someone died wrongfully, then that's the time to pick up the phone. Don't hesitate. Call right now and reach out and call the lawyers.
All righty. A question. We love getting these questions, so go ahead and feel free to get those to us. That information is on the screen there. A question here. Does the Wrongful Death Act apply to any injury that causes death, or does it have to be a special kind of injury?
It doesn't. It applies to any injury that causes death if the action, the legal terms are act or omission, occurrence, things of that nature. But basically, if someone acted contrary to law or acted in a negligent way and it caused the death of another, wrongful death covers any of that.
Okay.
It covers basically any personal injury claim you might have had that results in death, including if I'm injured in a car wreck and I get put in the hospital and a lawsuit is filed on my behalf while I'm in the hospital.
Right.
If I were to die as a result of those injuries, a wrongful death claim could be brought in addition to the personal injury claims that were already asserted in the lawsuit. We could what's called amend in or bring in those secondary claims, and they're different. They cover a different area of damages under the law, and we can talk about that down the road. But there are different types of damages that are covered and that are allowed both with a traditional personal injury case and with a wrongful death case.
Okay. All right. Another question we've got here. 2 years ago, my mother filed a negligence claim for the injury she received in an automobile accident. She passed away a year ago. If her death was caused by the injury she received, what can I do? So this is something, this dates back a couple of years.
That's right. Yeah, this is exactly sort of the issue that we were talking about just now, and that is as long as the claim arose or the incident happened within 2 years of the date you file your case, you're okay. If the person's already died, and the injury she received caused the death, then you would bring a wrongful death case. Okay. If the claim is filed after death, it's a wrongful death claim only. This goes to what I was just talking about. If the claim is filed while they're still alive, you would have your general personal injury claims, negligence, wantonness, willfulness, things of that nature, and then you could amend in or bring in that wrongful death claim after death.
Right.
But only if the death is actually related to the injuries they received. One of the questions I always get is, well, I got these injuries, and then later my dad was hospitalized and died of some secondary issue.
Right.
There's not going to be a wrongful death claim for that.
Yeah.
Okay, that you're only going to have the general personal injury claims. Personal injury, one of the things I want to make sure we talk about, and John can help me with this, but you can talk about different types of damages, and I think we could talk about that maybe on the other side of the break.
Yeah,
would be
let's
a good
do that.
topic for us to do.
Yeah, we'll pause it right here. We'll take our first break of the evening. As we do so, welcome you in to be a part of the conversation. Call, text, email. You can also find the firm of Hollis Wright on Facebook if you'll search that term, and on Twitter it's Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. More of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, and thanks for watching the attorneys on Alabama's 13. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never need legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Now, your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to this show or related to other civil legal matters, call, email, or text us to talk with one of our lawyers. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter to learn about important legal news that could affect you or your family, or simply contact us by going to alabamas13.com and click on the attorney's link. Now, we know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and for watching The Attorneys right here on Alabama's 13.
Firm facts are always quite interesting. Welcome back into The Attorneys. Appreciate you being with us as we were heading to break, talking about something that really leads in perfectly, fellas, to our a question we've got. If I file a wrongful death claim, what damages may I be able to recover?
Well, generally under Alabama law, the way it's set up now, you can recover punitive damages, and there's a difference between punitive damages and compensatory damages. Punitive damages are meant to tax the wrongdoer and really punish them. A lot of people say that a corporation understands the bottom line, and they don't have a mind, a soul, a body, or spirit, but they understand dollars. And so to tax a corporation, you hit them where they live, which is their bottom line. And you can punish them by getting a good wrongful death recovery. But you can't get compensatory damages. You can't get loss of consortium or other damages which would compensate the plaintiff's family. Which is unusual. Alabama is the only state in the union that has that law, and that may be due to be addressed at some point to change it. But right now, what you can get are punitive damages, which are damages designed to punish the wrongdoer. And I guess the thinking was at the time was that it was hard to quantify the value of the human life. But really, you know, an economist now can calculate compensatory damages, so we may want to look at that at some point.
Yeah. And John's exactly right. I mean, one of the things that really plays into this is that punitive damages are, people really get up in arms when you start talking about punishing someone. And John's right in saying that's exactly the initial thrust of what that type of damage is for, but it's also, more importantly, to deter future wrongful conduct. One of the biggest ways that the law has been impactful in these types of cases historically, and changes that you've seen that have been made, for example, in the auto industry, and think of the Ford Pinto cases. For years, they'd get rear-ended, they would explode, well, people would die. A lot of the reasons those cars got changed because of punitive damage awards that were high because people died or were catastrophically injured. Those punitive damages deter that type of wrongful conduct in the sense of the companies knew that those products were unsafe, they were putting them on the road anyways. When you hit them with a higher verdict to compensate for that loss of life, it deters that future conduct. It changes the course of conduct for people. And in the compensatory side of things, you know, those damages and punitive have to be high because you're not being awarded lack of ability to earn money. You're not being awarded loss of earnings or lost wages. You're not being awarded the loss of your spouse. What's that loss of consortium John was talking about? That's the services and companionship of your child or your spouse, a sibling, a brother, a mother. You can't make those claims. You're not being awarded medical bills. You're not being awarded out-of-pocket expenses. And so the only claim you can bring under wrongful death is that punitive claim. And so it has to be awarded at a higher level in order to, one, compensate for that loss of life, two, cover all those other damages that aren't being covered, and three, hopefully it changes the perspective of the person, the entity, or the company that did the wrongdoing to begin with.
Right. What sort of a time frame or time window is there with wrongful death claims?
That's something to really be aware of. You have 2 years to file a wrongful death claim under the statute of limitations, but if it's a county claim, then you have a year, and if it's a city claim, you only have 6 months. So you really need to be proactive and take action, not reactive. Don't wait, don't be passive, don't sit on your hands. Reach out and call a lawyer, and a great firm to call is the Hollis Wright firm.
John's right. I mean, there are those specific time frames that make it so important to call a lawyer and get in touch because you are limited, and it is different. Counties, cities, things of that nature. You got to file what's called a notice of claim. It means present your claim to the county, present your claim to the city, and if they reject it, You still have up until that 2-year window to file your formal lawsuit. But if you don't file that notice of claim within that 6 months for the city, a year for the county, you're toast. Yeah. Your case is gone. And so that's why it is important. You want to make sure everybody's fine. You want to make sure that if you're in an accident, people are safe. But at the same time, if you suspect that someone was killed because of someone else's wrongful conduct, we talk about this all the time on the show. Josh says it all the time. The evaluation's free. If it's not us, call somebody else. We're not saying you have to call us. Call somebody. Yeah. The evaluation is free. Most firms take these on a contingency contract. We front all the expenses. There's nothing that's ever going to come out of your pocket. And in fact, the firm's going to eat the expenses in the case if ultimately they're not successful for you. So there's no risk on your side.
Yeah. Another question we've got here. I'm thinking of filing a claim for the death of my husband. He was the head of the household and brought in an annual income of $38,000 while I stayed at home and cared for our children. If I file a claim, can I recover the income our family would have received if my husband was still here with us?
Unfortunately, no, you cannot. You would only be entitled to punitive damages. Perhaps you'd like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about a few minutes ago. The wrongful death statute only allows those punitive damages. It excludes all the compensatory side of things. So as it seems unfair, and candidly it is. And John hit on this a second ago, and it is unique, and I want to make sure we point out, Alabama is the only state I know of, the only state we know of, that doesn't allow or limits only damages to punitive damages and wrongful death. Texas is a good example. We have a lot of laws in common with Texas for whatever reason, but one we don't share with them is their wrongful death law. Texas's wrongful death law allows you to get medical expenses before death, loss of wages and future earning capacity, loss of love and companionship, that's that consortium claim we've mentioned a couple of times, the pain and suffering, mental anguish, emotional distress that somebody may go through prior to death or in the seconds leading up to their death, all of those are compensable under their wrongful death statute. Alabama's a little draconian in that sense. We limit it, we capsulate it and take it down to its core, and we only allow those punitive damage claims. So it's limited in that sense, but the numbers and returns tend to be somewhat, or can be higher, because there's a dual purpose in, again, changing conduct, sending a message, helping to push forward safer behavior.
So would a court work with the numbers of the $38,000 a year in this case, or
no? It would totally be irrelevant at that point. Really? In fact, chances are good that the wages that the person was earning would never even come in to never even be brought up in the case. It might come up in a deposition, it might come up in a statement or testimony, but it's never going to be presented to the jury as evidence, because the only thing a jury in Alabama is allowed to consider in a wrongful death case is the wrongful conduct of the defendant. What did the defendant do wrong? Not what was the impact to the person.
Yeah.
So it's very limited.
Okay. All right. Another question we've got here. My father filed a lawsuit for injuries he received during an automobile accident that occurred 5 years ago. And we said earlier about the time frame. The litigation has been going on the entire time. I'm concerned he's not going to see the end of it given his poor health. He's now in a nursing home. If he dies before the case goes to trial, can I file a wrongful death claim on his behalf? That's kind of a tricky the way that one's working there.
Well, that depends on whether the injuries your father sustained in the car accident caused his death. If his death arises out of pneumonia, which he contracted during his hospitalization, then no. Right. But if you can link it up and track it back and tie it in to the injuries that he sustained in the automobile accident, then yes. Or there may be another way you can go about it.
Yeah, as long as the injury is related to the original, as long as the death is related to the original injury, that's what I'm trying to say, then yes, there could be a wrongful death claim that comes in, and that wrongful death claim can be brought even though your father, in this scenario, dies. Let's take the pneumonia out of it for this purposes of this example. If he died as a result of the injuries he was sustained in the automobile accident, then once he passes away, you would go through the process we talked about earlier. Open an estate, get an administrator appointed, get letters of representation or administration opened and granted. And then under what's called the survival statute in Alabama, that allows a loved one acting on behalf of the deceased to continue that claim forward, even if there's no wrongful death component. Okay, So even if he died from things unrelated to the accident, in this case he dies of pneumonia, if the lawsuit is filed prior to his death, then you can continue that for him as long as that estate is brought and opened.
Right. All right, time for our second break of the evening. As we head to break, I want to remind you of how you can become involved in our conversation. Call, text, email, Facebook, Twitter. The firm of Hollis, Wright, they really try to make it easy for you to be a part. Invite you to do so. Stay tuned. More of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright. Now, we often hear the phrase burden of proof when it comes to civil or criminal lawsuits. It's the level of proof that a plaintiff must meet to win their case. But these burdens change whether you're in a civil or a criminal court. So in this week's Legal 4-in-1, we're answering the question, who holds the burden of proof and what is the burden in the case? Let's start with civil cases. Civil cases are brought by a plaintiff who claims they have been injured by some way by a defendant. Because there is no chance of jail time, since the injury does not amount to a crime, the burden of proof is not as difficult as in criminal cases. The level of proof here is called preponderance of the evidence. In general terms, that means the plaintiff must prove that it is more likely true than not true that the defendant is responsible for the plaintiff's injuries. You've seen the scales of justice before. Both parties have to fill those scales up with evidence to support their position. If the plaintiff can fill his scale up with just a bit more evidence than the defendant, the plaintiff wins the civil case and is entitled to a verdict. Now, the stakes are much higher in a criminal case than that of a civil case. That's because a criminal defendant could lose his freedom or even his life if he's found guilty. So who holds the burden of proof in a criminal case? Well, the state does, because the defendant is being accused of breaking state law. The state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. It's the heaviest burden in the justice system. The evidence has to be so convincing that the jury believes beyond any reasonable dispute the defendant is guilty. Probably guilty just isn't enough in these cases. The law requires the jury to find the defendant not guilty if there is any doubt at all. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. Thanks for watching The Attorneys right here on Alabama's 13.
Welcome back in to the attorneys. Our conversation tonight, we're about to go in an area that it's interesting to me that this is often used as just like a great way to typify and explain kind of wrongful death and to talk it out, and that is the infamous trial of O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, we were just talking about this on the break, David. It's probably the most famous trial in pop culture. I mean, it was the first time that a trial was live televised across the country and everybody got to be a part of it and the sensational aspect of it. But it's a great example. Criminally, he's acquitted. Civilly, Nicole Brown's family brings a lawsuit against him and he gets taken to the moon in a wrongful death case because it was the wrongful conduct. A civil jury said and believed that O.J. committed some act against Nicole Brown and showing my ignorance right now, I'm blanking on the Ron Goldman, thank you, and sent a $9.5 million verdict, I believe, something like that against him. That number's probably not right, but some big seven-figure number against him. And it just showed that even though you're acquitted on the civil or the criminal side, on the civil side, you can still carry liability if your actions harm or kill someone.
And interestingly enough, that case was for an intentional act. So wrongful death act case goes forward for intentional acts as well as acts of negligence. And it doesn't really insulate the wrongdoer in that it's intentional. And the criminal case went first and then the civil case followed afterwards. And he was able to run the gauntlet on the criminal, but he was made to pay civilly.
So, and you pointed out intentional, he killed, he was accused and convicted of killing kind of him doing that himself versus if there was like an accident,
Right.
being
And-
negligent behind the wheel.
And therefore he was civilly liable for the wrongful death of another and was taxed and made to pay.
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, keep in mind, we get into the civil side of things. I mean, lots of people are more familiar with the criminal side because that's what's sensationalized on TV.
Yeah.
But on the civil side of the law, you can be held liable and accountable not just for accidental things that happen. That's negligence, a mistake. I had this duty and I was supposed to follow these rules of the road and I didn't, and I hurt somebody in my car.
Right.
If you intentionally hurt someone, there are civil penalties for that as well, and OJ is a prime example of how those both come into play.
Yeah. All right, let's try to buzz through some questions since this is our final segment here. Question here: I have a neighbor who recently lost a young child and wants to file a lawsuit. Can they file a wrongful death claim on behalf of their child?
Yes. In fact, parents bring claims on behalf of the children all the time. We had a case, Josh Wright and I had a case a couple of years ago where a teenage young man was drowned in a pool down in Montgomery. And his family, his mother, brought a claim on his behalf. And there are specific laws that protect the claim of the child. In fact, even a divorced parent, but the custodial parent, in a divorce setting can bring a claim for their child. And if that custodial parent doesn't want to bring the claim, the non-custodial parent in some circumstances can bring a claim to protect the rights and the lawful rights of that injured or deceased child.
Okay. Another question here. Someone who was, and I'm trying to make sense of this here, injured in Georgia, but because of the injuries they ended up dying in the state of Alabama. Can a wrongful death can it be claimed here?
No, it would need to be filed in Georgia. You must file the case where the accident happened.
Okay, all right.
And in Alabama, it's interesting too. You got to file it not just in the state, but in the county where the deceased person could have commenced the action if they were alive prior to their death. So that's called venue. Where's the claim proper? There's very specific ways you've got to navigate that. Again, very important. Get with a lawyer. You can really mess up your case trying to do it yourself.
Yeah. Let's really try to quickly, if I'm the representative of my mother's estate in a wrongful death claim, who gets the damages award?
It depends on who survived the deceased, and Alabama has what is called a statute of distributions, and this determines how the money is split or divided up. Notably, if you receive a damages award, it is not subject to any liabilities or debts. So the award is outside of the debts of the estate.
Right. Okay.
That's right. Meaning no creditor can come into the estate. If I die with student loans, but my death was caused by your negligent driving, and my wife brings a wrongful death claim, Sally Mae or the government can't come back against my wife for the money she gets that's a wrongful death claim. Because that money never passes through the estate. It passes what's called outside the estate.
Okay. All right. Time for our final thoughts. John, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. If you are unhappy with the state of the Alabama wrongful death statute and would like to help bring about a change where compensatory damages are allowed, then call, text, fax, or email your local legislator and ask them to help us bring about a change.
And David, we talk about this all the time. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They're incredibly important. They're going to happen to somebody you know at some point. Wrongful death is a component of all these other kind of shows that we do and all these topics. And the need for these types of lawyers to get a lawyer involved is paramount. You got to open an estate. We're going to talk about that, I think, next week on the next week's show.
We've got time to talk about that. So next week's going to be wills and estates?
Next week's going to be wills and estates. We've got a good friend of mine, Jerry Templeton, coming on. He's an expert in wills, estates, and trusts. Jerry's been nice enough to agree to come on and field questions for us. We're going to talk about how do you set up an estate, why do you need it, when do you need it, what do you need in a will, what are the specifics for it, trusts, when are they needed for special needs or not. It's a really complicated area of the law, but it dovetails in perfectly because in a wrongful death claim, you got to have an estate. So you need multiple lawyers involved in those types of claims.
All right, and that's coming up next week. Well, gentlemen, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks
so much. Appreciate you being with us as well. As we wrap things up, ways you can get in touch with the firm of Hollis, Wright. You can call them, text them, email. Also find them on Facebook and Twitter as well. We appreciate you so much being with us, and we'll look for you next week right here on The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright.